few years ago, the New York Times said Agenda 21 doesn't exist. Agenda 2030 doesn't exist. So Trudeau goes out in a governmental announcement and says we're implementing Agenda 2030. Here it is.
Building back better means getting support to the most vulnerable while maintaining our momentum on reaching the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the SDGs. Canada is here to listen and to help. This pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset. This is our chance to accelerate our pre-pandemic efforts to reimagine economic systems that actually address global challenges like extreme poverty, inequality, and climate change.
Build back better. And I'm looking forward to getting started as soon as we can.
At the end, what the fourth industrial revolution will lead to is a fusion of our physical, our digital, and our biological identities.
All these different UN combines and agreements don't exist. Anybody could go look them up and find out they do exist.
In the year 2015, the world agreed on the ambitious, inclusive, and universal Sustainable Development Goals, making a commitment to leave no one behind.
It is so decided.
Just a few months later, we are already seeing those promises transform into first concrete steps for action. On 21st of April, presidents, prime ministers, and other high-level representatives from around the world gathered at the UN headquarters in New York for a high-level debate on achieving the SDGs now that the goals and targets have been set.
We have no time to waste.
We need first to take seriously the goals, because these are the world's goals. They're the only goals we're going to have for our generation.
The Agenda 2030 is going a step further because it recognizes that things need to change here in the rich countries as well. There's obligations for rich countries too in terms of environmental pollution, our production and consumption patterns that are destructive for the planet. Tax policies that are creating inequalities, illicit financial flows, all these things, and finally some very concrete language on governance, on democracy and all that.
We will now start a quite high number of task forces to look at all the different issues, and we will present all those ideas to the people assembled in Davos. But at the same time, we will make Davos very different, very open, to ensure that we do not fall back to old recipes, but that we really look at forward-oriented solutions.
We have a unique but rapidly shrinking window of opportunity to learn lessons and reset ourselves on a more sustainable path. It is an opportunity we have never had before and may never have again. So we must use all the levers we have at our disposal, knowing that each and every one of us has a vital role to play.
Now is the time to think what history would say about this crisis. And now is the time for all of us to define our own role. What is it that would make it so that history would look at this crisis as the great opportunity?
But it's big corporations saying, we're going to shut down the world economy, consolidate it for the ultra-rich, and tell people we're doing it to save the earth because the carbon is evil, even though all life on this planet is carbon-based. So Agenda 21 has been going on for 30-something years, since 1992 in Rio de Janeiro, when it became world law under George Herbert Walker Bush. And then 5 years ago, they passed at the UN. We didn't agree to it, but they still did it.
In just 2 months, the world has an opportunity to unite around a strong global agreement.
Obama said he agreed it. The Senate didn't go along with it. Agenda 2030, you should go read it for yourself. And then everything they say that they're doing the opposite. It is now day 64 of the 79 days of hell. Communist China and its New World Order allies are desperately trying to overthrow the election of President Trump. Joe Biden has illegally declared himself the victor in violation of federal law and his own promises. The enemy of the American people, the corporate establishment press, is in total panic mode because almost no one is buying their lies and disinformation. And now the mainline Republican Party has awoken to the truth of the New World Order and world government. And Tucker Carlson is a fancier, more well-produced version of InfoWars. Not because Tucker Carlson's copying yours truly, but because the world has awoken. Yes, the enemy's striking back hard, but my friends, when it comes to the culture war, when it comes to recognizing the UN and its true aim of world government depopulation, we are winning.
This pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset. This is our chance to accelerate our pre-pandemic efforts to reimagine economic systems that actually address global challenges like extreme poverty, inequality, and climate change.
Oh, this is our chance, says Justin Trudeau. Not our chance to save you from a virus with a 99% survival rate. You'll almost certainly be fine, and they're fully aware of that. This is our chance to impose totally unprecedented social controls on the population in order to bypass democracy and change everything to conform with their weird academic theories that have never been tested in the real world and, by the way, don't actually make sense. This is their chance. Quote, this pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset, end quote. Keep in mind, that's not from QAnon. That is a head of state talking. And he's not alone. Klaus Schwab is the founder of the World Economic Forum. Schwab has written a book called COVID-19, The Great Reset. The book isn't really about science or medicine. No. Instead, it describes, quote, what changes will be needed to create a more inclusive, resilient, and sustainable world going forward, end quote. What changes is Schwab talking about? We don't know. What we're certain of is that you're going to pay for them, and the people in charge will benefit from them. You can bet on that. What's telling is how different this is now from the way our leaders were talking back when the pandemic began. So statewide coronavirus lockdowns in this country started about 8 months ago in mid-March. At the time, California's governor, Gavin Newsom, predicted that 56% of his state's population, that's more than 25 million people, would become infected with the virus within 8 weeks. Businesses would need to shut down, Newsom acknowledged, but he also promised it would all be over soon. Quote, this is not a permanent state, Newsom assured us. It is a moment in time. And that should have made us nervous. Because in the end, that moment continued indefinitely. Pretty soon, Gavin Newsom was telling us who we were allowed to be around and who we were allowed to talk to.
As always, I want to remind you, limit your mixing with people outside of your household. It's just common sense, but the data suggests not everybody's practicing common sense.
Okay, so that was in July when Gavin Newsom told the data suggest. What have we learned from the data since then? Well, as of November 15th, about 2.6% of the total state of California has been infected. That's roughly 20 million fewer people than Gavin Newsom predicted would be infected by May. So in some ways, that looks like a victory. Can we declare victory? No, just the opposite. Today, Newsom announced that more lockdowns are underway. California, he said, is pulling the emergency brake. The emergency brake on life itself. Tonight, 41 counties in our biggest state are under the most restrictive form of lockdown. Churches, gyms, restaurants, etc. cannot conduct any kind of indoor operations. So on what grounds is Gavin Newsom declaring this? Well, scientific grounds, of course. Gavin Newsom believes in science, but he doesn't believe in it for himself because personally, as a man, Gavin Newsom is exempt from the laws of epidemiology. And we know this because 9 days ago, the governor was caught violating his own guidelines, eating at one of the state's most expensive restaurants with a dozen other people. And by the way, he's fine. He didn't die from it. When you're God, you don't fear viruses. Lockdowns are for mortals. So you'd think getting caught would hurt Newsom. Getting caught ignoring your own rules used to be a major problem for politicians. But it's not anymore. They are no longer humiliated by their own hypocrisy. The point of the exercise is to humiliate the rest of us by forcing us to obey transparently absurd orders. Let's see what we can make them do next. Okay, for health reasons, everyone has to wear a Viking hat with horns every Wednesday. It's the law, Dr. Fauci's orders. And by the way, people would do that. They would. They'd follow the order. CNN would scream at them if they didn't. In an environment like this, dominated by completely unreasonable demands from the people on top, mediocrities like Mayor Lori Lightfoot of Chicago thrive. This is a moment created for her and people like her. Watch Lightfoot explain on MSNBC how she has no personal obligation to follow the lockdown restrictions that you could be arrested for ignoring.
What do you say to those who are criticizing you where less than a week ago you went out and stood before a massive crowd who was celebrating Joe Biden's victory, and now you're saying your city has to shut down? How do you have one and not the other?
There are times when we actually do need to have a relief and come together, and I felt like that was one of those times. That crowd was gathered whether I was there or not.
Notice the complete lack of embarrassment. No shame whatsoever. Inflection in the voice doesn't move. There are times when the rules just don't apply to me. Okay. And no one says anything. So when specifically are those times? When don't the rules apply to the people making the rules? Well, in Washington, D.C., Mayor Muriel Bowser decided that her rules did not apply to Joe Biden's victory party in Delaware. So she went. Going to the party, she explained, was, quote, absolutely essential, and it was, and you would have guessed this, official business. So Muriel Bowser didn't have to quarantine or restrict her travel in any way because it was on behalf of the Democratic Party. What does the Great Reset look like? That's what it looks like, where the people in charge can do whatever they want because they're in charge. No principle is universal. No standard is evenly applied. No one's enjoying this more than the governor of Washington State, Jay Inslee. Inslee is not a man of science. He's a lawyer, like the rest of them. But watch him explain what you're not going to be allowed to do anymore in his state.
Indoor social gatherings with people from outside your home are prohibited unless they quarantine for 14 days prior to the social gathering. Outdoor gatherings are limited to no more than 5 people. Restaurants and bars are closed for indoor service. Religious services will be limited to 25% of indoor capacity or 200 people, whichever.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. I've got plenty of important stuff to cover. I don't normally start the broadcast with 5 minutes or 6 minutes of Tucker Carlson, but he knocked it out of the park. And the full 30-minute monologue, usually there's a 5-minute monologue, is solid gold. It's posted at Infowars.com and Newswars.com. I hope you share it. But here's the final equation. This is about unjust weights and measures. That's why behind us we have the goddess of justice. She's supposedly blind, but in this case, it isn't the goddess justice with the scales in her hands. It is the globalist. Here with their psychological warfare chiefs trying to overthrow logic and trying to overthrow the Western traditions because they sit in contravention to their absolute total despotic power. And that's what this is about. It's what this has always been about. So Tucker said something the first. He said, we don't know what this Agenda 2030 is all about, but it's a UN run, the richest people in the world, and it's a power grab. And we know that it's dictatorial. No, Tucker, I know you know. I was sending you great reset videos in March saying this is their plan. We made a bunch of reports about it, so did Greg Reese. They're at band.video. But Tucker is spoon-feeding, which is fine, his audience to get them ready for what this is. Tyrannical world government, total shutdown of society and civilization by design, and we got to get out of it now. You can't wait. They're putting the chains on now. So we're going to come through and lay all this out. Then Ollie Alexander's in studio. We're about to go to Georgia with how to stop the steal in the next big leg of the fight. This is a critical transmission. You'll want to stay with us. Infowars.com. Tomorrow's news today.